To be with us, so thank you. We are here because we believe in AI's transformative potential, and I'm certain you've heard a great deal about it over the past few days. Today, this session is about something deeper. The digital divide is rapidly becoming a compute divide. AI today is not constrained by imagination. It is constrained by infrastructure, by who has access to GPUs, to cloud capacity, to scalable compute. And that divide will determine who shapes the future of AI. Democratization in this context is not about catching up. It is about expanding who gets to lead. It is about ensuring that the next generation of AI breakthroughs are not concentrated in a handful of geographies, but are shaped by diverse talent, languages, and lived realities across the world. And here, India is not waiting for permission. India is showing that it can be done differently. Through the India AI mission and through the compute capacity plan, mobilizing more than 38,000 GPUs as public infrastructure, India is building one of the most ambitious public interest compute ecosystems anywhere in the world. This is not incremental reform. This is infrastructure at scale. This is sovereign capability combined with openness. India is demonstrating that public interest AI infrastructure can be built in the Global South, by the Global South, and the Global South, and for the Global South. And this leadership matters because equitable access to compute is not just about hardware. It sits alongside access to data, open source models, talent, and institutional capacity. India is proving that you can design AI ecosystems that are both globally competitive and locally grounded. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we believe this moment requires moving from diagnosis to action. Philanthropy's role is to be catalytic, to reduce risk, unlock capital, and convene unlikely partnerships that accelerate progress. Over the next hour, our discussion will unfold in 3 acts. First, what exactly are we democratizing? That's an important question. Second, how do South-South partnerships and catalytic financing accelerate progress? And third, what concrete commitments can we land this year? If India's example shows us anything, it is this. Democratization is not theoretical. It is operational. It is scalable. And it is already underway. The question now is how we accelerate it together. Before we begin, let me take a moment to acknowledge a few leaders in the room. Shri Abhishek Singh, who unfortunately has been pulled into another meeting, but his leadership has been amazing. His steadfast partnership and support has been something that I'm extremely, extremely grateful for. His vision of guiding this important work with clarity has been just spectacular. Dr. Saurabh Garg, we are honored by your presence. You've been in sessions since this morning, and thank you for your leadership. It's truly a privilege to have you with us today. My colleague, Andrew Sweet, who has joined us from across the world, one of the sharpest minds at the Rockefeller Foundation, and truly a force for good. Thank you for being with us today and stewarding this conversation. And of course, I want to also thank Charu, who's been working endlessly and very hard to kind of get us to this place. So thank you, Charu, for your leadership. Martin, Vilas, Sean, and Dr. Shiko, thank you for lending your voice and expertise to today's discussion. Your perspectives will help ground this dialogue in both ambition and action, and I know all of you are action-oriented folks, so we're going to have something really cool come out from here. And last but certainly not least, our partners at Kalpa Impact, Sushant, Anish, Jennifer, thank you for being extraordinary collaborators and for helping shape today's session. It is now my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Gaur. Please, over to you, sir, or maybe I'll hand it. Okay.
Thank you, Dipali. When I mentioned the report, hope you're okay. When I mentioned the report, I fumbled the name, so I'll go again. Opening up computational resources for new AI futures. New AI world is possible. And this is something that the team has worked really hard over the last few months. And today is an opportunity when we release a working version of that report and invite inputs, feedback, comments, and suggestions, which we will work through over the next few months. This research helped us think through and work with the Democratizing AI Resources Working Group under the leadership of Dr. Saurabh Garg, and he's here. So it's a pleasure and a privilege for us to invite him and the other panelists to release this report. Please hold your reports to the camera. Thank you. Thank you. May I now request Dr. Saurabh Garg for his keynote speech. And when I thought of, who could be the best person to deliver remarks today when we are talking about opening up computational resources, or in fact, all resources that are necessary for development of AI in public interest and for real-world impact, I could think of no better person than Dr. Saurabh Garg, under whose leadership I think we have come a long way in not just the intellectual thinking, but as he will tell you, in terms of operationalizing how we can bring this to life for billions in the global south and also the other countries in the world. Dr. Saurabh Garg, please, for your keynote.
Thank you. Colleagues, panelists, great to be here, and great to see a large, the kind of attendance that we've seen over the past few days in the AI Summit. There were 7 working groups set up under the AI Summit umbrella. And one of them was on democratizing AI resources. I had the privilege to chair that group along with Kenya and Egypt. So I'll obviously talk a bit on that. But before that, just to say that I think all of us are of the opinion that AI will definitely transform the world. I think the question is whether that transformation would be equitable, would be inclusive and aligned with public interest. And I think that's really the issue which concerns a lot of people. The AI Summit itself was built around 3 guiding sutras: the people, planet, and progress. And therefore, the concept being that AI ultimately must serve human welfare, advance sustainable development, and enable shared prosperity. I think these would be key background in the way these sutras were developed. And obviously, democratizing many of these resources would be key to that. During our working group discussions, we had the opportunity to talk to a large number of countries, people from academia, civil society, and other international organizations. And I think one consistent message was that most countries are not really seeking only access to AI, but also seeking agency in AI. And I think that's key. And how the AI systems need to reflect each country's own development priorities, languages, and social contexts. From these discussions, there were 6 foundational pillars that we thought need to form the backbone of the collective roadmap for the future. Compute capability, collaboration, connectivity, compliance, and context, and I'll just briefly speak on each one of these a bit. Compute, no doubt, is today's defining barrier. The access to GPUs, accelerators, high-performance clusters is a major issue for all AI ecosystems. But the issue is how it can be made distributable, affordable, and reliable across, and not concentrated in a few geographies. And this would no doubt require us to look at whether compute can become a shared infrastructure in future, or kind of which supports public interest innovation. And to the extent that we are focusing on innovation, how that part can be a public interest infrastructure. Secondly, infrastructure would not be sufficient. There is a widening skills gap. So how we can consider capability diffusion, focusing on joint research, shared standards, open platforms, and mutual learning. What needs to be done for this responsible deployment is so that we can link innovators to compute resources and citizens to trustworthy AI-enabled services. Equally important would be governance, that the governance framework needs to be robust enough to build trust, yet flexible enough to adapt to diverse social and cultural contexts. Open source and maybe modular AI stacks would help in enabling localization without creating dependency. So looking at some of these issues on what mechanisms can be done to facilitate accessible and affordable computing resources by improving utilization rates and reducing transaction costs, and also to lower barriers for access regardless of geography. The working group looked at how this can be taken forward through a collaborative platform designed to expand access through shared access to compute data in partnerships. And the platform has been termed as Maitri, which is friendship in Hindi. Maitri, M-A-I-T-R-I, standing for Multi-Stakeholder AI for Trusted and Resilient Infrastructure, to be developed as a digital public good that countries can adopt, customize, and build upon. And obviously, it is non-binding, voluntary, modular approach, depending on the context of each country, what kind of compute and what kind of methods can be used to have accessible, at least for innovators and researchers, looking at data sets that can be put out, which are take care of the national laws and national protocols in place, and look at models which are open source and which can be placed. So this we envisage would help to at least ensure that portions of AI are a global public good, because we are focusing on innovation and research out here, and this would go beyond just a focus on hardware and platforms, but also in skills, institutions, and governance capacity. I would just like to mention one area that how perhaps it might proceed in future is also the fact that while infrastructure or compute seems to be the biggest constraint going forward as of now, that's perhaps also based on the present models requiring large amounts of compute capacity and energy. Going forward, would models retain this system of algorithms that they have, or would there be obviously small domain-specific niche models? I think yesterday there was a very nice remark made by Vishal Sikka, who mentioned that unlike when we talk of compute infrastructure, we are talking in terms of gigawatts, nothing less than that of whatever. But when you talk of a human being, you talk in terms of only 2,000 calories requiring a human being to sustain itself, which is not more than a 100-watt bulb for a day. So are we missing something out here? And I think that's a very important point that he made yesterday, and that's why the focus. I think we need to have much more on the models, and that itself might solve a lot of the areas that we are. And when we're talking of democratizing AI, perhaps that's the path forward. So I'll stop here and thank you all. Thank you for this opportunity.
We now transition to the panel discussion, and may I request Andrew Sweet, VP at the Rockefeller Foundation, who is the moderator for the panel. Please join us here on the stage. May I request other panelists, Dr. Shiko Gitao, Martin Tisney, Vilas, to join us on stage. Yes, and Sean, sorry. Andrew, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Garg, for those inspiring remarks and for the framing, insight, and perspective that you bring to this conversation and all of the many conversations that you've had throughout the course of the week. So we're excited to continue and deepen the conversation today, and very excited that we have 5 of the world's brightest minds to discuss this topic. These are all people that have been in the AI arena for decades. This is not new to them. And all people that have deep regional expertise and global perspectives. So very excited for this conversation today. We don't have a lot of time. We have about 25 or 30 minutes for the conversation, so we're going to dig in. We're not going to have a number of speeches. Dr. Gerg's speech will be the only speech that you've heard today, but we'll have a short series of provocations, but with actionable ideas for how we can move this agenda forward. And so hopefully this conversation can be, informal, back and forth banter. I think we'll have one round of questions, but it'd be great if we could kind of feed off of each other's questions and energy, because I know we all have a lot to say here on the panel and a lot of expertise to share. So I'll briefly introduce the panelists, then we'll dig in. You've already met Dr. Garg. He's the Secretary of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation for the Government of India. He has been instrumental in shaping India's AI governance and previously led the technology stack for the Transformative Aadhaar initiative. We have Martin Tisney, founder of Current AI and public interest envoy for France's AI Action Summit. Martin has spent 15 years building multi-stakeholder initiatives like the Open Government Partnership that we had talked about earlier today to govern technology based on democratic values. We have Vilas Dar, president of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. Vilas serves as on the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on AI and leads one of the world's largest philanthropic commitments to AI for public purpose. My friend Dr. Shiko Gitao, founder and CEO of Kala AI, a visionary from Kenya. She established Safaricom Alpha and has been a leading voice in ensuring that digital transformation in Africa solves real problems in education, healthcare, and agriculture. And finally, Sean Xiao, CEO of Philanthropy Asia Alliance. Sean is working to catalyze collaborative philanthropy across Asia, leveraging deep expertise from his time at Temasek and as CEO of MediaCorp. So we'll continue the conversation. First question will go to Dr. Garg. India has launched the India AI mission with a target of 38,000 GPUs. If we view compute as a public utility, much as we do with water and electricity, what is the governance model that India is envisioning? And should compute access be rationed or priced differently for public interest applications?
Yeah, so I would say that the focus is not on rationing, but on intelligent prioritization. I think that's going to be the focus, that the impute capacity is an enabling platform, and as I mentioned, as a digital public good, at least as far innovation and research is going, so that we focus, and I think that's where a lot of the philanthropic organizations would have a large role to play. Given that their focus is also on ensuring that AI benefits all. So with that focus in view, how governments, philanthropic organizations, and the private sector can collaborate to ensure that affordable compute capacities are accessible to all. I think that's the models that we are looking at, and that will ensure experimentation going forward.
That's great. Thanks, Dr. Garg. Martin, I'll go over to you. Through current AI and the Paris Charter, you've convened governments to discuss public interest AI. How do we move nations from being consumers to genuine co-creators? And quickly, you've also spoken about this looming data bottleneck. What do we do to unlock data sets for training without compromising privacy?
Okay, two big questions. Thank you. So, as you mentioned, we launched Current AI last year. We'll be launching just this afternoon our first product, which is an open hardware product looking at linguistic diversity. I think I'll be a little bit provocative to maybe start our session. I think compute is critical for obvious reasons. I think that from a financial, from an innovation, and from a sovereignty perspective, it is also possible to overplay it. I'll tell you what my worry is, and I'd love to know what the panel thinks. I do have a worry that we could end up in a few years' time in a world where we succeed in having compute capacity, in inverted commas, in a number of countries, including in the global south, but where effectively the data centers are not used. We've been talking to colleagues around the world. You do also have data centers that are effectively kind of white elephants and that are not used at anywhere close to full capacity. And so I think for countries to be able to exercise sovereignty, they need to have contextual AI. They need to have contextual data in their languages with all of the diversity and the incredible richness that typifies their cultures available in order to create contextual, localized AI that actually serves outcomes that people care about. And so while the compute piece is important, I think it's one part of the issue. We need to talk about the data piece, and we need to talk about the second part is the open source one. So briefly, I think throughout the event, people talk about open source AI, that it's a really good thing, that we're all pro it. I think we also need to talk about how, from a philanthropic perspective, we resource the open source ecosystem. The reality of open source software is it's mostly the top tier of open software is funded by large companies that are using it, right? Linux is partly funded effectively by volunteers working for SpaceX that are using it. There's a bottom tier of dependencies in open source that are run on a shoestring, by a few critical, amazing people working overnight as volunteers, and there's very few organizations, one of them which is a partner to Current AI, Roost, which looks at robust open source trust and safety, that are funding those critical dependencies. So I think that for states across the world, in the global south, in the north, to really be able to exercise sovereignty, and I'd love to talk about this a bit before, but I don't want to hog the mic, we need to talk about compute, but also we need to be realistic about what the compute is going to be used for. So I think the data piece and the open source piece are really important. I think I've probably run out of time to talk about the data bottleneck. So
Go for it.
Go for it? Yeah. Well, so the number of people in the room I've worked with for a long time on this issue, Vilas, you're one of them, Sushant, you're another, I won't name check everyone. I think it's fantastic that there's been so much innovation in compute and we've seen such change over the past 10 years. In contrast, I think it's a complete tragedy that we haven't seen anywhere near as much innovation when it comes to data, and specifically the ability for people to be able to share personal data in ways that are both respect privacy and contribute to outcomes. And that's effectively it. I think we need a huge amount more resources and thought, both when it comes to the technical side of the issue, and here, other than the side, I think that partly it's solved, but enterprise users of AI have access to these kind of technical safeguards in a way that private users don't. And there's a story that we can talk about if we have time. And then on the governance side, so for example, Vilas, you and I have talked for a long time about different, and Sushant and others, different forms of data stewardships, whether data trusts or others. To the day, I haven't seen one that really scales to the level that we would want to see it scale to. And that, I think we need a lot more resources, a lot more thinking. There's been work done, but if we could harness even 20% of the brain capacity of the world that's going into compute right now, I think we would be in a very different place. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. Actually, Vilas, I'll go next to you, because I think this reminds me a little bit about a recent article you wrote about the Indian Premier League as a model for how India builds world-class institutions. I reread it this week in preparation for this conversation. Is there a similar IPL playbook for public interest compute, or is the window for building these public institutions closing as commercial consolidation accelerates?
Well, I can't think of a more controversial topic to spend our time here in this conversation than cricket. It's been a good week all around, but I think many of the people in this room probably know. Before I start, I just want to say, Dr. Garg, I want to acknowledge in particular your leadership on this work. I spend a lot of time with senior decision makers across governments, and the conversations that we have had have really given me great hope for the combination of technological competence, but also an understanding of what this means across an ecosystem. And so I want to acknowledge your leadership in particular. Thank you. Look, this question around the IPL I think is great, right? I mean, let's not torture the analogy and take something really fun and then try to like tie it to AI. But here's what I'll say about it. I think in many ways, what we need is a new institutional framework that goes from the elites who are participating in their own places to something that feels deeply participatory. And I think around compute infrastructure in particular, we are stuck in a model where we keep re-engaging and renovating old concepts and try to describe a new world. I will tell you, sovereignty has been the buzzy word of the moment, right? Everybody wants to talk about sovereignty and diffusion. Sovereignty, as a Westphalian concept that goes back a few centuries, tries to take the idea that ownership of pieces of silicon somehow magically results in outcomes and impact that transform lives. Now, there are logical links, and of course there are codependencies. But to simply say that we will cite compute in a particular geography and so figure out a way to disconnect ourselves from the interdependence of the 21st century doesn't really bring us to a good outcome. I'll tell you the second part of this, AI diffusion. If you haven't heard this already, every tech CEO here, this has been the buzzword of the moment. I spent some time yesterday with the Prime Minister and a number of tech CEOs who wanted to talk about their investments in India. Those investments in many ways followed the playbook of the PR press release. They were, we're going to build a new data center, we're going to invest in a new compute capacity. But when you dig deep and you ask the next question, who will this really benefit? What value does this create for public impact and outcome? How does putting a large number of servers in a particular place result in that community finding an economic uplift, a benefit in economic opportunity, a sense of dignity? The conversation sometimes falls flat. So AI diffusion, to me, in its core concept, the idea that you hyper-concentrate technological capacity, compute, data, and somehow the rest of the society benefits, sounds a little too much like something that, as an American, I know too intimately as trickle-down economics. The idea that if we made the rich as possible, somehow the benefits would filter down to everybody else and it would work. AI diffusion is a passive concept. It starts from the premise that we build technological capacity for a few and somehow it works out for everybody else. But there's an alternate model, and it ties directly to this report that's been issued today and the work that we've been talking about. For AI to benefit everyone requires a direct and active impact. It requires us to step in and say, what are the institutions we have to build that actually physically and metaphorically transform the idea of compute infrastructure to be something that everybody can use? It requires us to build the institutional layers and the capacity that lets a community that's trying to solve a local problem know that compute isn't the thing that holds them back. Rather, the conceptualization of the problem, the aggregation of the full stack of resource sets, as Martin described, that include compute, that include data governance mechanisms, that include the political agency of communities to participate, and let us then turn that into that final app solution, infrastructural development that actually leads to the outcome we're solving for. In many ways, I think this is the great role of the institutions that are represented here on the stage and in this room. For philanthropies to transform the capital landscape in a way that says, great entrepreneurs and leaders like my dear friend Chico here, and so many here in India that are building open source, public access AI stacks, don't have to worry about the resource constraints of the private capital markets. That they know that they can access governmental and substantive structural resources that let them build the tools that they want to. And know that they have equitable access to the markets as well, as a matter both of policy and as a product, that they can go out and get to consumers and creators, that they can provide a service that let people use it at scale. And the last part of this, and I have to say this, is this doesn't happen, as we've discussed, in the private market. But it also doesn't happen exclusively by going to frontline nonprofits and saying, now you're supposed to be the builders. It requires us to innovate a new institutional set of intermediaries. I think of groups like Culpa Impact, which I think is an incredible example of a combination of technical sophistication, policy impact, support for government that actually sits at the layer that connects these different elements and lets us build on top of it. I think this is the work that's ahead. If we really think about pragmatic outcomes to this conversation, Andrew, I think one of the questions we might ask is, what are the institutions we need to build in the next 12 months? that connect the dots around all of these different pieces and support this transformation at scale.
Never short of ideas or insights or provocation. Thanks, Vilas, very much for that. And I think I'll go next, Dr. Shiku. I came across a recent article that you put out there saying that for the West, AI is a matter of efficiency, but for you, it's a matter of life or death. You've been a champion for AI access. You were very active in this summit. You were very active in the Kigali summit. We were together at the launch of the first ever AI factory for Africa together in April in Kigali. You've also talked about global tech companies, if they want African data, they should provide compute infrastructure in return. How do we formalize these reciprocal agreements? And what does a true India-Africa partnership look like that doesn't just reciprocate global north-south models, similar to what Vilas was just talking about?
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It's always fun to listening to everyone here on this. So I was hoping somebody is going to preempt some of the work that I was going to talk about. But lucky for me, I have some stuff to talk about. Thank you, Vilas. So when we talk about compute, it's this amorphous thing. In fact, we launched an AI research lab in Nairobi, and we have some GPUs there. And one of the key things was like a demo showing up what a GPU is. And our PS was like, oh my God, this is what a GPU, because he's never seen a GPU. And then I made sure, like, every time I'm speaking, I'm asking, how many of you actually have seen a GPU, not on the internet, touched one? Maybe 5 people. And this is everywhere, every single room that we're talking about compute, we ask the same question, have you ever seen a GPU? And sure enough, 5 to 10 people. So it's this thing that people talk about. We need GPUs, we need compute, we need all of these things. And for us, it is very important as an African continent. We had like a research colloquium for the Global South a few days ago. Same question, how many of you? About 10 people had ever touched a GPU. How many of you need compute? Everybody raises their hand. But what does that actually mean? In fact, one of the panels, the starting point was like, when it comes to compute, we all need Jesus. And I thought, how do we quantify this? So and I think we have already spoken to Kalpa about this. We're working, I think, on the same time about a framework. So we just released a compute demand index. Because we realized every time you speak about compute, people have ideas, they have thoughts, they have proposals. They don't have the numbers to say that. We need GPUs. How many? We need megawatts. And the gigawatt, megawatt conversation, what does that a gigawatt of compute actually mean? So we went ahead and said, for Africa, we need to, every time we're having conversations with these governments, this is actually what you need. But you actually need to put money into it. So our first index was demand index. And the second one is your country ready for this compute? Which we're calling AI investment readiness index. So I'll give you some numbers. Africa needs 2.5 million hours of GPU hours a year. 7.5 million for the next 3 years to be able to start competing well. This is for training as well as research. That is something that I can work with. So when I come to India and say, I need 2.5 million GPU hours a year, how many of them can you give me? And we had this conversation with the UNDP and Italy, and they said, oh, we have 1.5 million GPU hours that we can donate. We have 1.1 million more to go. You know, Cassava is saying we are putting 2,000 GPUs. How many hours of GPUs with those GPUs? Hours, not actual physical. How many hours of GPUs with those 2,000 GPUs actually provide for the continent? So we need to start being very practical rather than being arbitrary on what we want. Of these 7 million GPU hours we need in the next 3 years, Africa only has 5% of that. So we were doing the maths. We only have 125,000 of these GPU hours a year, which is like times 3 of that for the next 3 years. So when you're solving, when I go to Vilas, I'm saying I need these GPU hours. It's very practical. I'll say I can be able to do 500,000 GPU hours. So it's not just going with an arbitrary number. I need GPU hours to be able to put this. And for us, that is important. But for me, it is the conversation about investment, and that's the conversation that we asked. How do we have this South-South collaboration? How do we have this India collaboration? How does it actually look like? there's the paradox. Everybody, as Martin said, everybody wants sovereignty. Everyone wants to talk about diffusion of AI. But what does that actually mean? Do we actually need it? Yeah. So I'll give 2 examples of my 2 favorite countries. Hopefully none of them is here, except Nigeria. So there's something you're calling the Nigerian paradox. Nigeria is the #1 country in the compute demand index. Why? Nigeria is doing very well. It's 110 million internet users, a huge population. They're doing very well in terms of like e-commerce, financial services. So they're up there when it comes to why they need compute. And we've seen this in India. India is very high there as well when you're doing the same exact thing. But what about investment readiness? And investment readiness is, are they able to, or capable of running a compute facility? Do they have power? Do they have the talent? And I think both Martin and the minister spoke about what we think about. When you think about compute, you don't think about just GPUs. It's a whole stack of things. It's talent, it's governance, it's all these things. And you're thinking about investment readiness when it comes to compute, you have to look about all these things. Because I can give you GPUs, as he said, and I've worked in digital transformation for the last 20 years, and I worked for the AFDB as a digital transformation lead, and we'll buy computers and go 3 years later, and they have never been powered at all. And that's the case that is going to be with GPUs, because you're going to give countries these GPUs. If they don't have talent, they don't have the power to run it, they don't have the data sets, they don't have models, they don't have use cases to build on top of it, you're wasting that money. And that's where the investment readiness comes in. So we're talking to countries, and we've had this conversation to African countries, is there's no point of investing all your dollars in putting a compute facility. Get your talent ready, get your data sets ready, have strong use cases that people can back. Then, with all of that, then can we then define what a demand you need? You don't need a gigawatt. Kenya, you do not need a gigawatt of compute to be able to run. Maybe you need a 200 megawatt facility, and that's where we want. So coming back to the question, how do we interact with India? Is looking, this is our demand. Burundi might need 50 megawatts of GPU. Can India be able to facilitate that? But it's not just about facilitating the GPU, it's what is the GPU in service of? Solving for health, education, agriculture. And when you have like clear use cases, then the GPU demand becomes an obvious ask. And I think bridging that and convincing governments especially of bridging that gap is what we need to be able to do. And then the governance framework actually comes to play. Thank you. I know that's a lot.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shiku. We'll go to Sean, and then I want to keep it kind of informal for the remaining 10 minutes after Sean speaks. So any reactions to any of the comments, and then we can do a lightning round if we have time. But if we don't have time, that's fine as well. Sean, over to you. The Philanthropy Asia Alliance brings together, you have 80 members and partners to address Asia's interconnected challenges through collaborative philanthropy. Is there an opportunity for Asia's philanthropic networks to coordinate shared compute and infrastructure, pulling resources from places like India, Indonesia, and other nations, rather than competing, and what would unlock that collaboration?
Thanks, Andrew. The advantage of coming last is that I could say, oh, I agree with all of them. Actually, I'm going to add to the much maligned word called compute. Maybe we could end the panel right away. I'm going to join Martin in actually agreeing that compute is actually a bit overrated, the ownership of compute especially. So when you think about the stack, I'm going to add another way to frame the conversation, Jensen Huang's AI stack. When you think about energy, hardware, compute, models, and applications, and the top layer applications is really what will drive and value capture for the economics as well as the impact, social impact. Really, the stumbling block is probably energy at the bottom level. And thankfully for many countries in Asia, the costs have been driven down because of the abundance of hydro, solar, and wind. Then when you think about the next layer of hardware, I mean, that's obviously dominated by Chinese and American players.
And when you think about the compute level, then I understand why we fuss over compute, because the Americans own, 75% of the GPU cluster performance. The Chinese 15%, Europeans maybe about 4%, and the rest of us are only like 0.1%. I think even India is just up at 1% of that. But I think the issue is actually deeper than just the ownership. I mean, if you think about what it needs to get the work done is more access. So the question you've posed me about sharing of compute, for example, between Indonesia and India. I live in Southeast Asia, and that's why Indonesia is like a couple of hours away from where I live. And we know the situation in Indonesia quite intimately. There's data residency requirements, and that's why there's a build-out of data centers. Think also of the physical limitations of actually the latency of sharing compute between India and Indonesia, for example. 10,000 kilometers apart. When you think about the latency of 50 to 100 milliseconds, it's just not going to work for the sharing of compute between Indonesia and India. Attractive as the idea is, it doesn't work. I think they're just physical limitations, data sovereignty, privacy issues that prevent that from happening. So I just want to look at the positive side of what's happening. When you think about the cost of compute is coming down. When you think about the emergence of neo clouds, GPU for a service, I think these developments are actually going to be good for the unleashing of AI, for social impact, for economic capture. So the way you can think about it is, how do we then make it a little bit more accessible for startups, for impact organizations? Maybe the way to think about it is really, how do you think about aggregating demand so that you can actually negotiate against with the neo cloud providers and get a cheaper pricing? How do you then think about philanthropy coming in to subsidize some of the compute costs? And I think I can't agree more with the observation that you really need to go beyond just infrastructure. You need to think about the ecosystem you're building. I think the skills gap in Asia is actually huge, and that could be really what's stopping us from really optimizing, maximizing the power of AI in what we want to do. Is that too long?
No, that's perfect. I'm not sure if anybody wants to react to any of that. Martin, I see you scribbling furiously. Maybe first reaction to you.
No, I am scribbling. I'm scribbling because I'm thinking about your points, I'm thinking about the points of the panel, and I'm thinking about the term sovereignty. So my scribbles are, Vilas, to your point about the Westphalian concept of sovereignty, that's about the ability to make law within your territory, right? And it's a very global north concept. And it's a notion of territory which has like physicality. And what I was scribbling was the physicality of the territory. It's like we're very focused on the physicality, as you were saying, on the GPUs, of the bricks and mortar. So we're going to be okay because we're going to be sovereign on this data center. The data center, it's on my territory. And what got me thinking is other concepts of sovereignty, such as when I was spending a lot of working on data collaboratives and data stewardship, thinking about indigenous data sovereignty, which is a different type of concept. It's a more relational concept than a territorial concept, right? It's about a pre-existing, an inherent authority, a relational authority over that which makes up a people. And so when we were studying, for example, indigenous data sovereignty in the Maori context in New Zealand, the Maori community, any data that in any way involves the Maori community's legacy is part of the Maori community. So I think that there's something here in thinking about a very, in some ways, a quite rigid approach to sovereignty, which is about control, right, as mentioned, and one which is more about agency and which is more relational. So that's what the panel has got me thinking, and I've been doing some writing and thinking with colleagues and friends around the notion, not of a sort of like a controlled national stack, but a global, open, resilient, collaborative stack. And that's not one at all, and just I'll finish with that. That doesn't mean that like all the data's open and anything goes and anyone can extract your personal data and you're back in a sort of Zuboff, surveillance capitalism world. It's one where it's a question of choice and agency and what you wish to exercise authority over and how. That's my scribbles.
I love this. And thank you. As you can tell, when we get on a panel with people you love and respect, the conversation just flows. So I want to build off this point and a little bit of what you said, Chico. I want to take a different tack to this question of agency, which is, if I had asked any development leader in the world 10 years ago, if you could have your dream of an extra gigawatt of energy capacity in your country, what would you do with it? I can't imagine that any of them would have said, well, I want to use it to run a bunch of computation on things that may or may not have short-term economic value for my country. Andrew, your organization has been incredible around the world at building capacity in grids, in power production, in ensuring that people can use power for development. And yet somehow, I think for many of us, we are surrounded by conversations where now the question has become, how many megawatts and gigawatts can you put into compute for AI? It is a fundamental challenge when you think about what are our priorities in development. Again, going back to core principles of human rights and dignity and participation, to say governments who have limited capacity should now all of a sudden be focused on this topic. It brings us again from this question and this shift. In many ways, I acknowledge that the traditional conversation around compute is one of breaking over dependence on the American AI stack, on other international players that are coming in. But the response to over-dependence isn't internal dependence, it's interdependence. It's saying if there are places that have incredible capacity and even potential to drive, as Chico said, the availability of compute hours, how do we build interconnectedness that lets that be a mutual value exchange? Not merely, again, clients who have to go to another country and say, please give or let us buy compute, but rather the products of that compute are going to be the build the infrastructure that you can then use in your own country. To allow for centers of excellence that allow for local capacity and local competence to drive what gets built, and to allow that to be the new tokens of international trade in a way that leads to a much more connected and shared prosperity, rather than descending back to that 200-year-old concept of how do we make sure that we're competitive in an adversarial frame. I recognize that what I've just shared with you is maybe not where the dominant private sector conversation is. And to those who would oppose it, the primary critique is, well, that sounds quite naive. And yet we've seen it happen, right? We're seeing it in the few areas of hope in the multilateral system where we're actually finding that technology governance is something that brings everybody to the table, that lets people engage in meaningful shared outcomes. We're seeing the seeds of it. The question is whether we're going to let them sort of die out in the sun or if we're actually going to water them, invest in them, and let them grow.
Great. Dr. Garg, any final insights?
I know there's a little time, but just one thing I would say that perhaps we need to spend a bit more time going forward on the frameworks that will help ensure public interest frameworks, looking at things beyond compute, looking at models, looking at talent, looking at data, how that can be shared and interoperable and in a manner which takes care of public interest. So I'll just stop it out there.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the Indian government. Thanks to our partners at CALPA for putting this together, especially for the authors. This is now officially out there. I think you have until March 31st to read the copies are available out there. You have until March 31st to review the document and submit your reactions. Thank you to the panelists. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.
I think the India AI team wants to hand over some souvenirs from the panel.